Welcome to International Management, the podcast that breaks down the core challenges and strategies of global business. Based on Orlando Casabon's scripts for his international management class, each episode offers practical insights, clear strategies, real-world examples, and expert guidance to help you navigate complex global landscapes. For additional resources, visit casabon.com. Now, let's dive into the essentials of international management.
Welcome to our deep dive into international production management.
Oh, this is a fun one.
Yeah, we're going to take a look at Orlando's script this time.
Okay.
Which is really a fascinating journey through all the stuff that companies have to think about when they're making and moving products all over the globe.
Right.
In today's interconnected world.
Yeah.
This stuff is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you don't work, in a factory or something.
Absolutely. Globalization has totally reshaped production.
Yeah.
It's not just about, finding cheap labor anymore. It's a way more complex web of strategic decisions.
Right. And the script even mentions that a third of global trade
Oh, wow.
happens within companies.
Really?
Think about that.
Yeah.
Parts of a product might travel across borders multiple times.
Wow.
Before it even reaches a store shelf.
Mm.
So it really highlights how interconnected all these businesses have become.
Absolutely. That brings us to the heart of it. International Production Management, or IPM. IPM. It's all about strategically planning and controlling these super complex manufacturing processes that span multiple countries.
So it's not just as simple as slapping a made-in label on something.
Right.
What are some of the tough calls that these IPM experts have to make?
Oh, they're juggling a ton. They've got to manage the entire supply chain.
Yeah.
Sourcing raw materials, coordinating all those parts, figuring out transportation.
Right.
And then there's the whole thing about vertical integration.
Wow.
How much of the production process does a company actually want to own versus outsourcing to somebody else?
So some companies want to control every single step.
Right.
While others are okay with relying more on outside partners.
Exactly. And the script uses BP, the energy giant, as a company with a high level of vertical integration. They control a big chunk of their production.
Okay.
On the other hand, Heineken, the beer company, they rely a lot on external suppliers.
Okay.
So it just shows that there's no one right way to do it.
It makes me think of that classic business school question of make or buy.
Yes.
Should a company make a component itself or buy it from somebody else?
Right.
What are some of the things that they think about when they're making that decision?
Oh, cost is a big one, obviously.
Yeah.
Can they produce it cheaper themselves, or is it cheaper to source it from outside?
Right.
But it's not just about saving money.
Right.
Companies also have to consider their expertise.
Mm-hmm.
Do they actually have the knowledge to make a high-quality component?
Right.
And then you can't forget about risk.
Yeah. If you rely too much on one supplier and something goes wrong.
Oh, yeah, that could be a disaster.
Yeah, that could be a big problem.
Exactly. And that's why the script points out this really interesting shift from traditional sourcing, where you're juggling a ton of different suppliers for each part, to something called modular sourcing.
Okay, modular sourcing. I'm not familiar with that.
So think of it like building with Legos. Instead of sourcing each tiny little Lego piece from a different supplier, you get these pre-assembled modules from just a few specialized suppliers. This streamlines everything. It makes it way less complex and much more efficient.
So you're getting bigger pieces of the puzzle pre-assembled?
Exactly. Fewer headaches for the IPM team.
Fewer headaches, yeah.
Exactly. But even with modular sourcing, companies still have choices to make.
What?
They have to decide between single sourcing, sticking with one supplier for a module, and multiple sourcing, spreading the risk across several.
Right, so it's a balancing act.
Yeah.
You want the best deal, but you don't want to be totally reliant on one source.
Exactly.
It's like diversifying your investments, but for production.
Exactly. Now let's talk about another big part of IPM.
Okay.
Location decisions.
Okay.
Where to actually set up an international facility.
Yeah.
This is huge.
Location.
Yeah.
They say it's everything in real estate.
Right. And it's just as important in global production.
Yeah.
It's a complex calculation where companies weigh things like labor costs, access to markets, political stability.
Okay.
The script even has a sample evaluation matrix
Oh, wow.
that companies use to make these decisions.
So they're not just throwing darts at a map.
No.
There's a structured process.
Definitely, they're thinking about things like the availability of resources,
Right.
infrastructure, and even the country of origin effect.
Okay.
How do consumers view products based on where they're made?
That's interesting.
Yeah, but even with all that planning, things don't always work out.
Right.
The script actually mentions reshoring,
Okay.
where companies bring production back home after having issues with offshoring.
So offshoring isn't always a perfect solution.
Right. Sometimes those cost savings just don't pan out.
Yeah.
Or quality control becomes a nightmare. Political or economic conditions can change suddenly.
So back to square one. Realizing that keeping it closer to home might be better.
Sometimes, yes. But the script also talks about this concept of distributed production,
Okay.
where companies spread production across multiple locations instead of putting all their eggs in one basket.
Ooh, that sounds complicated.
It can be, but it's often necessary in today's world.
Yeah.
Companies do it to get closer to customers,
Okay.
to tap into special expertise in different regions, or even just to reduce risk by not having everything in one place.
Right. So it's that don't put all your eggs in one basket idea, but globally.
Exactly. And the script outlines different strategies for distributed production.
Oh, cool.
One is parallel production,
Okay.
making the same product in multiple locations.
So maybe catering to different regional markets.
Exactly like having a backup in case one location has problems.
Right. So they're running the same playbook in different factories.
Precisely. Then there's cross-border production,
Okay.
where different steps happen in different countries,
Okay.
often to save money, by finding the cheapest place for each step.
Like a global assembly line.
You got it. And then there's the world market factory model,
Okay.
a centralized production hub,
Okay.
pumping out products for global export.
So this is the mega factory approach,
Exactly.
making tons of standardized products to ship all over.
Think smartphones or cars.
Right.
They're made in these centralized factories that can produce at competitive prices.
It's crazy to think about the volume of stuff
Yeah.
moving around because of these production networks.
It really is. And that brings us to logistics, the unsung hero of it all.
Right.
The script emphasizes how important logistics is in IPM,
Yeah.
especially the differences between national and international logistics.
Yeah. It's easy to forget about that whole getting it from A to B part.
Right.
But I imagine when you're shipping stuff internationally, it gets way more complex.
Oh, absolutely. Think about all the paperwork.
Oh, yeah.
Entire departments.
Yeah.
Just to handle customs forms and shipping documents.
It's amazing that anything gets delivered on time.
Right.
With all that to deal with. And then the script pointed out how even something as simple as packaging
Oh, yeah.
becomes a whole other thing
Yeah.
on an international scale.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah, you got to think about different climates,
Right.
how things are handled,
Yeah.
different languages on the packaging.
Right. So it's not just like,
Yeah,
throwing it in a box
right.
and setting it
And
on.
that's way more than that.
Before we get too lost in the weaves here of international shipping, I'm sure some of our listeners might be thinking,
Yeah.
why should I care about all this IPM stuff if I'm not, the one actually shipping products around the world?
That's a great question. And I think the script kind of subtly answers that.
Okay.
Throughout,
Yeah.
think about the everyday things you use. Your phone, your clothes, your car.
Yeah.
Chances are they're all a result of this complex global process. So understanding IPM kind of gives you this new perspective
Okay.
on how the world economy works,
Yeah.
how interconnected we all are.
So it's like peeking behind the curtain
Yeah.
and seeing how it all works.
Exactly. And on a more practical level,
Yeah.
understanding IPM can be a huge advantage in business.
Okay.
Even if you're not directly involved in manufacturing.
Right.
Whether you're sourcing materials, managing a supply chain,
Right.
or just trying to understand the global forces
Yeah.
shaping your industry.
Okay.
This knowledge is valuable.
So it's not just theoretical.
No.
There are actual real-world applications.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
And speaking of real world,
Yeah.
let's talk about beschaffung strategies.
Some shopping strategies.
It's just a fancy German word for sourcing?
Okay, sourcing. I know that.
Yeah, the art of finding the best stuff for the best price.
Right.
I'm guessing that gets even more complex internationally.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And the script explores this evolution from traditional sourcing to modular sourcing.
Right, like we were talking about before.
Remember the Lego blocks?
Yeah.
Instead of all those tiny parts,
Yeah.
you get the bigger pre-assembled modules.
Right. It's all about simplifying.
Yeah. What are the benefits of that shift?
Yeah. What are the benefits?
Well, the script points out a few key ones.
Okay.
First, it reduces complexity.
Okay.
It's easier to manage a few suppliers with complex modules than tons of suppliers with individual parts.
Right. Fewer emails to answer, fewer phone calls to make.
Fewer headaches.
Yeah.
It also leads to increased efficiency.
Okay.
When you get those pre-assembled modules, assembly is smoother and faster.
It's like getting a head start on the production line.
Exactly. And it often means better quality control, too.
That makes sense.
Yeah, when you have those specialized suppliers building and testing the modules, there's less chance of problems later on.
Right, so it's not just speed and efficiency. It's getting those building blocks right from the start.
Exactly. Now managing a global production process can get even more complicated when production is spread out across different locations.
Right.
The script calls this distributed production.
Okay.
It can be a logistical puzzle.
I bet. Yeah, I can only imagine trying to coordinate everything, moving stuff back and forth across borders.
Right.
Sounds like a headache.
It can be, but the script emphasizes that it's often a necessity in today's global economy.
Right.
Companies do this for several reasons. To get closer to their customers, to tap into specific expertise in different regions, or just to mitigate risks.
Right. Not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Exactly.
Okay.
The script breaks down different strategies for distributed production. There's parallel production. Making the same product in multiple locations.
Okay, so maybe like serving different regional markets.
Exactly, or having backup production in case one location has problems.
So it's like different factories running the same play.
Precisely.
But with some variations.
Then there's cross-border production.
Okay.
Where different production steps happen in different countries.
Okay.
This is often to save money.
Right.
Finding a most cost-effective location for each stage.
Like a global assembly line.
You got it. And lastly, we have the world market factory model.
Okay.
A central production hub.
Okay.
Churning out products for worldwide export.
So this is like the mega factory approach.
Exactly.
Making huge quantities to distribute globally.
Think smartphones or cars made in these centralized factories that can take advantage of economies of scale.
Right, so they can produce things at competitive prices.
Exactly.
It's fascinating to think about all these different models and how they work.
It is. And thinking about all that stuff, moving around the planet makes logistics even more crucial.
Right. Logistics.
The script really emphasizes that international logistics is a totally different ballgame compared to domestic logistics. We're talking longer distances, more complex transportation networks, a whole web of international regulations.
Yeah. I can imagine. Trying to navigate all those customs regulations in different countries would be a nightmare.
It's definitely a challenge. And the script points out how even packaging gets more complex on a global scale. You have to consider climate variations, handling differences, even language barriers when you're designing packaging.
Right, because it's traveling all over the world.
Exactly. It's almost like the packaging itself has to speak the language of each country it goes through.
It's a good way to put it.
It highlights the need for these sophisticated IT systems to track shipments, manage documentation, optimize routing.
So it's like having a digital command center.
Exactly.
That's monitoring everything in real time.
And it's not just about efficiency and cost savings. Technology can actually help companies build stronger relationships with suppliers and customers.
How so?
Through real-time updates and better communication.
So it's like building a network of trust.
Precisely. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about something that often gets overlooked when we discuss IPM, International Trade of Services. Services. It's a reminder that IPM isn't just about physical goods. The service sector is huge, and it's growing rapidly.
Okay, so what does this script have to say about that?
Well, for one thing, services are often more heavily regulated than physical goods. You can't just ship a service across borders like you can a container of sneakers.
You can't put it on a boat.
Exactly. Governments often have specific rules about providing services in their countries. And these regulations can be both helpful and hindering.
So sometimes they're like tour guides. And sometimes they're like border guards.
Exactly. And then there's the challenge of managing something that's intangible.
You can't measure the weight of a service.
Exactly. It's about ensuring quality, consistency,
Okay.
customer satisfaction,
Yeah.
all while dealing with cultural differences,
Right.
language barriers.
So many layers.
What are the key things
Yeah.
companies need to think about?
Yeah. What do they need to consider?
The script highlights a few important areas.
Okay.
Capacity planning is crucial.
Okay.
Figuring out how much service they can provide
Right.
without affecting quality.
Without sacrificing quality.
Exactly. Then there's location strategy, just like with manufacturing, where you position your services matters.
Right.
Especially for services that require face-to-face interaction.
And I imagine designing those service facilities has its own challenges.
It does.
You want a consistent brand.
Right.
But you also need to cater to local customs.
Absolutely. You have to balance global branding with the local cultural sensitivity.
Right.
It's about creating a recognizable experience for customers worldwide while respecting local preferences.
It's like a delicate balancing act.
It is.
Like creating a global symphony.
Yeah.
But each instrument has its own unique voice.
A perfect analogy.
Yeah.
It requires a deep understanding of both the global market and the nuances of local culture.
So it's clear that managing services globally is not easy.
It's not.
It requires a different skill set than managing physical goods.
Absolutely. And this highlights another crucial point.
Okay.
IPM is constantly evolving as technology advances. Global markets shift.
Right.
New service models emerge.
Yeah.
IPM has to adapt.
Right. It's got to keep up.
Which brings us to a really important question.
Okay.
That the script hints at.
Yeah. What's that?
What does the future hold for IPM?
Yeah. What does the future hold?
The million-dollar question.
Right.
The script doesn't have a crystal ball.
Right.
But it does give us some clues.
Go ahead.
One recurring theme is the increasing importance of technology.
Yeah, we've talked about how IT is changing logistics.
Right. But its impact goes way beyond that.
Right. All the buzz around automation, AI, 3D printing even.
Right. How are those things going to reshape IPM?
That's a good question.
Automation is already transforming manufacturing. Robots and AI systems doing tasks that humans used to do.
Right. So we could see fewer factories full of workers. More factories with robots.
It's a possibility, but remember, AI isn't just about automation. It's also about analyzing data, making smarter decisions.
So AI could be used to optimize supply chains, predict demand, even design products. So the future of IPM might be more algorithms.
Perhaps.
And less gut feeling.
Maybe. And then there's 3D printing.
Oh, yeah, 3D printing.
Which could completely disrupt traditional manufacturing.
Okay.
Imagine being able to print products on demand closer to the customer instead of shipping from centralized factories.
That would be revolutionary.
You would.
It would change logistics, reduce transportation costs, open the door for more customization.
Exactly. And those are just a few of the technological trends that are likely to impact IPM.
Right. It's not just technology, though.
Right. We also have to think about sustainability.
Sustainability. Yeah, that's a big one.
How is that going to influence the future of IPM?
As consumers become more environmentally conscious, they're demanding more sustainable practices.
Absolutely. And companies are responding by trying to make their supply chains more sustainable.
So we'll see a bigger emphasis on using recycled materials, reducing waste, minimizing transportation emissions. So the future of IPM might involve a lot more green thinking.
Without a doubt.
Okay.
And it's not just about meeting consumer demand.
Okay.
Sustainability also makes good business sense.
Okay.
By reducing waste and conserving resources, companies can save money.
So it's a win-win.
It is. We have technology pushing the boundaries and sustainability guiding us towards a more responsible approach.
Right. So we have those two forces kind of working together.
Exactly. And those two forces will probably intersect in interesting ways.
Okay.
For example, AI could be used to make supply chains more efficient and sustainable by finding the most cost-effective and eco-friendly routes.
So the future of IPM might be about finding that balance between what technology can do and respecting the environment.
Precisely. And this is going to require a new generation of IPM professionals
Okay.
who are not only skilled in logistics and supply chain management, but also comfortable with cutting-edge technologies and who understand the importance of sustainability.
So it's not just being a logistics whiz anymore.
Right.
You got to be tech-savvy and eco-conscious.
Absolutely. The future of IPM
Yeah.
belongs to those who can think holistically,
Okay.
connect the dots
Yeah.
between technology, sustainability, global interconnectedness.
See the big picture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. This has been an incredible deep dive.
It really has.
We've covered so much ground.
Yeah, and I think what's really struck me
Yeah.
throughout this whole thing
Yeah.
is just how much IPM impacts our everyday lives,
Right.
even if we don't realize it.
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting is that while the script lays out all these big systems and concepts, it also kind of makes us think about what it means on a personal level.
Right. It's like the script is giving us all these tools and then saying, okay, now how can you use this?
Exactly. It encourages us to ask ourselves, how does IPM affect my industry?
Right.
My job? My choices as a consumer?
Yeah. So, for example, if I'm working for a company, that's thinking about offshoring production. Maybe I should keep in mind those reshoring trends we talked about.
Yeah.
Maybe the cost savings aren't worth the risks.
Exactly. Or if you're in a field like consulting or software development, you can apply those insights about managing international services.
Right. How do you maintain a consistent global brand while still respecting local cultures?
Right. How do you ensure quality and customer satisfaction when your product is intangible, like knowledge?
Right. It's not a physical thing.
Exactly.
I'm looking at those made-in labels differently now.
I bet.
I'm thinking about the journey those products took and all the decisions that were made along the way.
That's the power of knowledge.
Yeah.
It changes how we see the world and how we interact with it.
Right. And it helps us make more informed decisions.
Absolutely.
Both professionally and personally.
Couldn't agree more.
So speaking of informed decisions, one final question for you. We've talked about all these trends shaping IPM, automation, AI, sustainability.
Right. What does it all mean for the future?
Yeah. What might the landscape look like in 10 years?
Well, the script doesn't have all the answers.
Right.
But it gives us some clues.
Okay.
We might see a surge in distributed production.
Okay.
As companies use AI-powered logistics
to manage those global networks.
Exactly. And those world market factories might become even more automated.
Okay.
Using 3D printing and other technologies.
To churn out customized products on demand.
It's definitely possible, but we could also see a counter trend towards more localized production, driven by concerns about supply chain vulnerability and the push for sustainability.
So imagine a world where 3D printing lets us make things locally, reducing transportation costs and emissions.
That would be amazing.
It would be. But it would require a huge shift in how we think about things.
Absolutely.
We'd have to rethink design, manufacturing, distribution.
It would create new opportunities and new challenges.
Right. We might see more local manufacturing jobs.
Yeah.
But we'd also need new skills and infrastructure
to support this decentralized model.
So many possibilities.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about.
And it just goes to show that the future of IPM isn't set in stone.
No, we shape it.
Right.
Through our decisions, investments, and vision.
For a more sustainable and equitable global economy.
Well said. The knowledge we've gained from the script empowers us to be more informed participants.
In shaping that future.
It reminds us that understanding IPM isn't just about knowing the past or present.
Yeah.
It's about equipping ourselves for the future.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
That's a great way to wrap things up.
So to our listeners, stay curious.
Yeah.
Keep exploring.
Keep asking questions.
About the world of international production management.
Because as the global landscape changes, so will this fascinating field.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive